Good afternoon. Thank you for the introduction, Alex. Thank you for coming. I think my default mode is loud, so if anyone has trouble hearing me, I'll use the mic. Otherwise, I hope we'll be fine. Happy to be here to talk to you about this subject that's been occupying most of my time and attention for the last 18 years. You notice we shows slightly different climatic themes for our, this is, here Heidi is in Colorado, Tanzania, and I'm in Democratic Republic of Congo, Tanzania. So neither of these is actually in the present area. Okay, well, in the first place, there are two basic kinds of bodies that are constituted under the IUCN that do red list assessments. There are specialist groups and red list authorities. Specialist groups tend to be oriented around taxons such as mammals or something. A red list authority is more organized on the geographic basis. So the Eastern African Plant Red List Authority was formed under the IUCN Species Survival Commission in 2005. We initially had 9 members. The tropical East Africa for floristic purposes, as in the flora of tropical East Africa, consists of Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda. So we initially had 2 members each from each of those 3 countries, and 3 others from outside Africa. Since 2011, we've moved on to all of the countries bordering on these 3 countries to the north and west. That is Burundi, Democratic Republic of Congo, Djibouti, Ethiopia, Rwanda, Somalia, Somaliland, which is not universally recognized as a country by all countries, but functions as a country, and South Sudan. So we currently expanded from 9 members to 33 members. And like all bodies constituted under the IUCN, we're volunteers. All resources for doing this work come from our institutions, come from individuals, come from foundations. We scare up our own money to do the work for IUCN. So here's our workshop 8 in 2014. These were all the participants. Some important people here are President Luke, who's been the chair of the Red List Authority since the beginning. He's associated with he's Kenyan and associated with the East African Herbarium. James Kalema from Makerere University in Uganda is now the co-chair. Hank Benchie from the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew, the final editor of the Flora of Tropical East Africa. And here we also have Ian Derbyshire from Kew, because this whole workshop was devoted to acanthacea, which is his major area of specialization. 9 years later, here we are, January of this year in Morogoro, Tanzania. Some of the same players, a little bit different in degree of hair pigmentation. You'll also note that Heidi immediately noticed a significant increase in the number of women participants, which is a good thing. We've expanded in countries and tried to get some kind of gender balance. So, originally our mandate were not even all of the 3 flora tropical East Africa countries, but rather the eastern Arctic mountains and coastal forests of Tanzania and Kenya. This is a map of the area that was designated by the Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund as a biodiversity hotspot. So we were working only in this area for all of our, at least our first 3 workshops were plants occurring within that area. Since 2011, taxa, when I say taxa, I always mean species, subspecies, and varieties, because all can be assessed for the IUCN, but we've added taxa from all of the other countries that in which we're working. So particular areas of emphasis have been the Lake Victoria Basin, which takes in parts of Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, and Tanzania. There were 4 workshops between 2016 and 2018 funded by the MacArthur Foundation for the plants of this area. We had a series of 2 workshops in 2019 and 2020. But the second one was in Rwanda, January of 2020, and we just barely got back into the U.S. in time to lock down for COVID. And in those workshops, we, the ERLA, assessed 110 taxa of trees from Burundi, Rwanda, and the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo, in collaboration with the Central African Wilderness Authority, and produced this book, the endemic and subendemic trees of Central Africa. People often talk about a red book. There aren't any red books anymore, it's all online, but here we actually produced one. Okay, geographic coverage. These are the 3 core countries in which we started. As I said, all of the Heidi managed to find a map with Somaliland on it, so that's good. Ethiopia, South Sudan, also a relatively recently formed country. We did not cover all the Democratic Republic of the Congo. It was basically the western flank of the Ruwenzori's down to Katanga here, and the Central African Wilderness Authority covers the rest of the DRC. The delimiting line is pretty big. So, methodology. Okay, we selected our highest priority taxa for assessment on the basis of their being potentially threatened. There are about 12,000, the whole area we're covering probably has 18 or 20,000 species. The total number of taxa that could be assessed is probably 40,000. If we took a random sample of everything, we never finish. We need to get the high priority things first. Those that are selected, they're rare, restricted in geographic range, occurring in stressed habitats for one reason or another, look like they're high priority for assessment. Data sources, important note, herbarium specimen labels. We only use data points that are vouchered by herbarium specimens deposited in accessible herbaria. We don't use visual reports. So we have a large number of herbaria in Burundi, Belgium, Tanzania, Kenya, Ethiopia, and all of these and more. Also, reliable literature citations of herbaria specimens, the specimen databases such as JSTOR Global Plants, Q Herbarium Catalog, GBIF, extreme caution required. We don't do uncritical bulk downloads from GBIF and believe everything we see, but we do look into GBIF and find reliable records to supplement data that we have from other sources. So, pretty standard methodologies. We record data on Excel spreadsheets, or sometimes it's uploaded directly on Tropicos. Tropicos is, I did the data organization for all of the initial workshops. Tropicos was by far the best place to organize all the data. So in fact, many specimen citations of non-null specimens that have been recorded for this spread listing. The distributional data are mapped using ArcNet 10.5 or something more recent. GIS people in the audience could say yes or no. So something using reliable GIS software together with the World Database on protected areas and other necessary layers. In the area parameters, we'll talk about these. Extendable currency area occupancy calculated using a program available from Q called GeoCat. Note here, it's the only program you can use. IUCN won't accept these if they're calculated using some other software, even if you get exactly the same answers. Apologies and everything. Okay, so data on many factors: population size and dynamics, threats to individual sites, kinds of levels of exploitation, any possible threats, and environmental factors and distribution are discussed and recorded. Members apply the red list categories and criteria and come up with a red list status for each taxon. Okay, that's a lot of, if you're not well immersed in this, that's a lot of jargon all at once, so let's take some of it apart. Well, first, then, once the assessments are ready, once we've decided what we think, they're transmitted to the IUCN Species Survival Commission for inclusion on the red list. So here's the homepage of the IUCN Red List website. Okay, a brief review of the IUCN Red List, which everyone has heard the words, but varying levels of familiarity with it. The important thing about it is it's not perfect, nothing is, but it's a global standard for assessing the risk of species extinction. And when it's used properly, when you see a red list category and criteria by which was reached, you know something about the data that were used to reach that conclusion. So it's a global standard that works quite well. It has a number of categories. This terminology is important because every extinction risk extinction risk categorization system has its own categories, and they're not always used in the same way. So not evaluated is not really a category. It means you haven't done it yet. Data deficient, we don't know enough. We've looked at it, and all of the data that we have are inadequate. Least concern means it doesn't reach the thresholds for any of the threatened categories. Near threatened is getting close but not there yet. Threatened, in some categorization systems such as the USDA, threatened is the name of a single category. The IUCN Red List, threatened refers to any of the three categories: vulnerable, endangered, and critically endangered. Above that, you have extinct in the wild, where something is known in cultivation but not known anywhere in the wild, or extinct. Okay, so each of those categories can be reached by through any one or more of these criteria. Criterion A is population reduction. You have to know something about the population size at one point in time, at another point in time. We don't have that kind of data very often in dealing with historical data from various specimens. Occasionally we do. B, criterion B, restricted geographic range. 98% of our assessments are done under the B criterion because that's what we do know. We do know where it grows or where it has grown, and we can say something about it. Small population size in decline, not very often. Very small or restricted population. Occasionally, we know enough about how many individuals actually exist in the world to use this one. Quantitative analysis is basically mathematical modeling. I think we used it once. So there are quantitative thresholds for each of these criteria, telling you whether a taxon fits into one of these three threatened categories. And there will be a short quiz at the end in which you can repeat all of the information on this. No, this is the cheat sheet. This is the one-page summary of all 5 categories and all of the thresholds that will lead you to any one of these 3 categories. We have printed copies of this spread around the table at every single workshop. So let's talk about some basic parameters. These mostly for use with the B criterion, which is the one we use the most. Extent of occurrence is the area contained within the shortest continuous imaginary boundary that can be drawn to encompass all known, inferred, or projected sites presently occupied by the taxon. If you know it was someplace and it's gone, like it's in the middle of Kinshasa or something, you don't use it for calculating the extent of occurrence. The mathematical term for this shortest continuous is the least convex polygon. We don't make any acute angles going in here. It stays convex, so it goes around the outside of all these occurrences. It gives you the geographic spread of the taxon. So if everything is concentrated in a very small area, it's more easily threatened than if it's spread out over a large area. Area of occupancy. That's the area within the extent of occurrence that is actually occupied by the taxon. And this is done by overlaying a grid and counting the number of occupied cells. So you can have something that's very widespread, but there's very little of it, it can still be in trouble. We used to talk about the effect of the scale of these grids. What size grid cells do you use? and there are many valid reasons for discussing that. We don't do so anymore because under the current rules, we have to use a 2 by 2 kilometer square. And there are rules and everything. Location is the most maddening, slippery concept in the whole process. It's very important. I wish we had a better word for it because it has a different meaning in IUCN parlance than locality. And location is strictly defined by threats. If you have no threats, you have no locations. It's a geographically or ecologically distinct area in which a single threatening event can rapidly affect all the individuals of the taxon. That sounds vague enough to start with, and then when you start to apply it, it gets even more difficult. You can have long discussions about it, and different people will come up with different ideas, but if all the data are there, you can decide whether you agree or not. Okay, here's a very idealized case, but it's a nice start. Okay, here we have an aquatic organism. It grows in the stream system with 2 tributaries, and in a pond or lake that isn't connected with the stream system. A threat comes along, an invasive species that's damaging to this taxon. This invasive species is motile. It can move upstream and downstream, so it can rapidly affect all of the individuals in this in the mainstream and the 2 tributaries. But unless it's introduced over here, you can't get to the individuals over there. So, based on, as defined by the threat of this invasive species, there are 2 locations, one of which is threatened, the other of which isn't. Occasionally, I've come up with one of our simplest real-life situations here where you can apply this fairly easily. It's frequently very difficult discussions about how to define locations. That's just the way it is. I don't think we can do the process without this concept, but it's not an easy one to use. Okay, you can also every system has its certificates and its training courses. There's an online training course to become a certified assessor, and in some situations you're required to have a certain number of certified assessors to run a workshop or various things like that. Heidi and I and a bunch of other people. I wonder why we were all doing this in June of 2020. I think it's because we were all at home. It means we can do it online. So there are 16 NVG employees who completed the global IUCN Ribless assessor training. It helps. I thought I knew the process backwards and forwards, and I learned quite a few things. Okay, so real examples from East Africa. This is an assessment that I presented at the workshop in January of this year in Tanzania. We have Psychotria. I wonder why I think of Psychotria. I don't know. Psychotria boxii, subspecies boxii. So we assess this subspecies. It's a quite well-defined subspecies, and so these mysterious polygons. The cross-hatched areas are protected areas from the World Database on Protected Areas. This is a digital elevation model, and these are the Eastern Sambara Mountains in northeastern Tanzania. So it's found in Tanzania at low mountain elevations, 460 to 850 meters. You see that. You can't really see, if you blow this up, you see that one of these is inside Nilo Nature Reserve. The other 2 are definitely outside these protected areas, besides which this protected area is a plantation. Okay, this template we filled in, each of the assessors at this workshop filled in these templates for species that he or she was going to present, and it goes pretty easily into the Redlist computer system afterwards. Okay, so here we have a taxon. The subspecies is known from only 3 herbarium specimens, representing 3 unique occurrences collected over a 46-year period, 1954 to 2000. So it's not a highly well, it's a little understory shrub, fairly inconspicuous like many psychotreas, but the area is pretty well collected and certainly not very common. So based on these occurrences, when we go back to this little, the ELO here is just a little bitty triangle, 13.7 square kilometers. The threshold for critically endangered is 100 square kilometers. So this could clearly be critically endangered if we were looking at the extent of occurrence only. But that one number doesn't give you an assessment. So it's under the ALO, area of occupancy, well, we're forced to use, but the rules, 4 square kilometer 2 by 2 grid cells, there are 3 of them. So that's 12. So according to the ALO, anything over 10 square kilometers can be critically endangered. This could be potentially endangered under the B2 criteria. So the principal threat is small-scale agriculture. Everything in the eastern Sahara Mountains that isn't effectively protected is very heavily farmed. And these two, by the way, are the much older collections. The one from 2000 is in the protected area. So you can define 2 locations with respect to the threat of small-scale local agriculture. The single occurrence in the nature reserve is 1 location, and the 2 unprotected occurrences are a second location with respect to that threat. This forest reserve was established in 2007, and along the western side, it's threatened by wildfires, and it helps to have literature references for this kind of statement. But there's no serious threat at the southern end where this taxon occurs. So the subspecies can be considered secure in that location. It would be nice to go back 23 years later and see if it's still there, but sometimes doing the assessment provides the impetus to go do that. But the unprotected land between the other protected areas, they're only 2.5 kilometers apart, collected quite a while ago. They're subject to the same threat at the same time. They're a second location. And supplementing the literature with Google Earth imagery, there's a lot of deforestation in both of those sites if you look at Google Earth imagery. So, given the extent of occurrence in the area of occupancy, the existence of only 2 locations, you can't be critically endangered with 2 locations if you can only be critically endangered with 1 location. And relatively high probability of losing those unprotected ones. An assessment of, and here's the complicated looking notation, endangered, B1 because of the extent of occurrence, A being the number of locations, which is 2. 1 is continuing decline in extent of occurrence, 2 decline in area of occupancy, 3 decline in habitat quality, 4 decline in number of locations, and 5 decline in number of individuals. And we repeat the same for the area of occupancy. So once again, it's not something you can memorize immediately, but that's the kind of thought process that we go through when we're looking at this kind of situation. There's the application of the B criteria. Here's another taxon, Gigacyphon macrocyphon. Heidi and I were discussing what this little insect is, and I think it's a weevil, not a fly. Gigacyphon macrocyphon, the Basia nudis in Albania, the flower looks something like a Botanical because it's very closely related. It's a big tree, very beautiful, tulip-like flowers with a nice yellow flag for pollinators. Real shiny seeds, good for playing bough. Distinctive big flat roots. This one's not so local. It's spread out over seven different localities, not locations, localities in coastal Kenya and further inland in Tanzania. But it's not common anywhere. And the biggest reason it's not common is it hardly ever gets a chance to grow up. The seedlings are, someone said, oh, they are like crap to the forest pigs. They must be delicious if you're an antelope or a Gereau pig or a cow or anything, because they get eaten right away. So because of the severe seedling predation, very few juveniles survive. The number of mature individuals is very low. Very low isn't quite enough for an assessment. You need a numerical threshold. We looked at the B criterion. There's this thing would be maybe vulnerable or maybe endangered. We did look at the B criterion, but then we thought I started asking in our workshop, who's been to this site? Every single site we've been to, some field worker, some investigator had been to all of them, and looking at the giant cyclone, and could give a good estimate of how many mature individuals there are. Mature meaning reproductively mature. So we started tabulating how many at each site, and we could only account for 38 mature individuals. The threshold for critically endangered under the D criterion, small population size, is 50. And it makes sense. You don't even need a threat if you have fewer than 50 individuals in the world population. Just pure stochastic events mean that you're in a real evolutionary bottleneck there. So critical under the D criterion because of number of individuals. And we could only do that because we gathered together a group of enough experts with enough field experience to come up with this conclusion. Some of this stuff you can do at a desk with your reference books, and some of it you can't. So, as in the case of all threatened species, we don't just do this to come up with a category and some criteria. We do it so that we can do something about it. What can we do to ensure the survival of this and many other species? We'll get into that soon. Okay, so here are some of the threatened species we've assessed. Here's an actual Bauhinia from the Coastania, Bauhinia mombasi. Its relative Jagocython we just discussed is critically endangered. And here's an endangered impatiens. Impatiens is a big genus in East Africa from southwestern Tanzania, and an aloe that's endangered. So, in all of these workshops, we've had 21 workshops since 2006. We've assessed 2,927 taxa out of the maybe 35 or 40,000 that grow in the area. 60% of the assessed taxa fall into these three categories. Does that mean 60% of the flora is threatened? No, it's not. It's intentionally not a representative sample. It's a biased sample, biased for the more threatened things, so that we can find out where they are and figure out what to do about them. Yes, we eventually want to have all of the flora assessed, but we need to start with the things that are in the most trouble. So, here's our record of assessments from 2006 to 2023. We're going great guns here, and for various reasons. Some of our workshops are shorter, some of them are online. But these assessments of ours don't magically appear on the Red List website. When we say that published on the Red List, meaning on the website, for some of the earlier workshops, the proportion is pretty good. Some of them are sitting around for 10 or 15 years and aren't all published yet. The more recent ones are evening out because our methodology, we're getting things into the Species Information Service a lot faster than we used to. So there's still some cleanup to do. So, what do we do about these things? Where do we go from here? Well, practical application of assessments and data. Well, obviously we're identifying taxa that are in need of more conservation measures. That's why we prioritize the things that are more likely to be in trouble. One thing we've already done is these pesky data deficient assessments. Data deficient means we've looked at all the information that's available anywhere that we can find, and it's not enough. Either the localities are vague, or we don't know anything about the threats, or any other things. We've done in 2018. I was on this particular trip, but we made a collecting trip to northwestern Tanzania and found, I think, 5 species that were known only from the type, some of them from as long ago as 1892, and actually came up with the data to move them out of the DD category. So it shows us where there's some work to do. We need to develop in situ and ex situ conservation measures for threatened taxa. No point in finding out they're threatened without trying to do something about it. We want to make a contribution to the global strategy for plant conservation. Identification of other practical applications are key biodiversity areas and important plant areas. More about that shortly. So here's one example of a program trying to do something about it. The government of Tanzania has actually made very concerted and effective efforts to conserve tree species in particular. It's always easier to get attention for trees than for herbaceous taxa. But we don't ignore those permits. Because of our enlisting efforts, we know of 361 Tanzanian tree species that are in these three categories. That's quite a few species in a country, I think it's almost 1 million square kilometers. And there's 65 more that are near threat. So this is just part of the Anacardiaceae and a bunch of Anaceae, and on through the alphabet. Okay, with the Tanzania Forest Service, we're developing a program to find ways to save those 361 threatened species from extinction and provide for their continued survival. So elements of the program need to develop propagation facilities and tree nurseries to do that. Fortunately, we're working in a country with there's not much funding, but there's a pretty well-developed infrastructure. There are nurseries already in which some of this work can be done. And they need funds, they need improvements, but there are nurseries already there. There are existing seed collection programs. The Tanzania Forest Service has a division called the Directorate of Tree Seed Production. That's pretty cool in a developing country, and they know how to do this stuff. So we need to target these threatened species, get them into cultivate, organize seed collection of the target species to propagate in Tanzania. Also, some of them here. Many of you know about Karomia gigas, probably the most threatened tree species in Tanzania. It's growing in our greenhouses here, and a few individuals at the Tanzania Forest Service, and only about 40 other individuals in the wild. So it requires efforts. It requires efforts both here and in country. So this is oriented for the eastern part of the country, because the eastern part of the country is where the government offices are. The transportation network is easier to work with. We need to expand westward, but there are tree seed production stations already existing in Lushoto, Morogoro, and Masasi, and a couple of other places that we're looking at subsequently. Here we have the stars are our primary target species. These are our flagship critically endangered species. Save them at any cost, and also get more attention from funders because they're critically endangered. And then secondary target species are other threatened species that grow these specifics. We have lists of species. We know where these things are. We know which things would very plausibly grow in these centers, and we're on the verge of submitting a grant proposal to fund this for the first 3 to 5 years. Okay, the global strategy for plant conservation. This has been a hot topic for quite some time. The last totally accepted global strategy for plant conservation was for 2011 to 2020, and it's been a major interest of Dr. Weiss Jackson, and a good framework around which to organize a lot of conservation activities. There isn't a totally agreed framework for going up to the year 2030 that I know of, unless I'm behind the curve here. But there's a lot of discussion within the CVD. Well, under the current numbering of objectives and targets, the red listing process certainly contributes to plant diversity being well understood and effectively conserved. Assessment of conservation status of all known species. we're a long way from it, but we're working toward it. Sustainable use of plant diversity, we're informing the public and saying that these are goals which are, I read through all of the objectives and targets and picked out the ones that look like they're most consistent with the red listing. Key biodiversity areas. Carmen and I think you're doing the training course, are you, Carmen? Yeah, we're both. Many of these IUCN related initiatives have rather similar online training courses and terminologies and criteria. But also, key biodiversity areas are sites contributing significantly to global persistence of biodiversity. The criteria look amazingly similar to the red list criteria. It's close to the nature of the red list categories and criteria. And this is a very involved graphic, but I like it because it has the green ones are places that have been designated as key biodiversity areas that are already completely enclosed within legally protected areas. The orange ones partially overlap the protected areas, and the red ones are completely outside protected areas. It gives you a good framework for thinking about conservation planning and policy, and saying how do we need to plan for the future of protected area networks in a large number of countries. Important plant areas. There's been some very interesting recent discussion of this. Alex Antonelli from Kew talked about it in his lecture a couple of months ago. Pretty limited based only on plant species. The key biodiversity areas include all kinds of biodiversity. Important plant areas are based on a set of criteria, including species IUCN red list status. They can be used in conjunction with the KDA standard. I don't know as much. I know something about the key biodiversity areas. I don't know much yet about important plant areas, so I mentioned them rather briefly. Here's a seminal paper from 2017 that explains all of the concepts. Oh, what are our challenges going forward here? Well, one of our challenges has been when we were working strictly within the three flora tropical East Africa countries, which are relatively well documented and well collected, has a nice gazetteer for all of the classic collecting localities. There's a reasonable level of scientific sampling and a reasonable amount of infrastructure for botany and plant conservation. You start moving out into the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, Somalia, South Sudan. There's not much of any of that. It's much more difficult. Instead of working with specimens collected from the 1950s to the 2020s, you're working with specimens collected between 1920 and 1940. It's a lot harder working in areas with less academic and government infrastructure. Funding is always a problem. The rate of publishing assessments, I already mentioned that with one of those bar graphs. 2,927 assessments performed, 84% are published on the Red List website, 16% are unpublished. That's not a shocking percentage. 9 years ago in 2014, it was 40% published and 60% unpublished. It was a mess. BGCI, Botanic Gardens Conservation International, galloped in to our rescue. We made an agreement with them to get some of their personnel to type a whole lot of things into the Species Information Service data entry and get them on the red list. They worked tirelessly with us, and they've improved the situation a lot. So that the Species Information Service system is laborious to say the least. Ask any of us who have typed things into it. So we'd like to see some changes to the categories and criteria. That's a lot harder than amending the Botanical Code of Nomenclature, and that's not easy. There is a little tag you can put on critically endangered species saying possibly extinct. We haven't surveyed enough to know to be able to state definitively that it's extinct, but we think there's a strong possibility. Unfortunately, it's buried deep in the documentation. You have to read all of the strict and it doesn't show up in the main listing when you just look at, when you download a set of assessments. We'd really like to see it out there in the open. And then one that we've been arguing, we tried to publish a paper in Oryx about this, and some reviewers from IUCN nixed it, and everything is being published. There are species that are least concerned because they're not in much trouble. There are species that are least concerned only because they're very well protected, and right now there aren't any threats that can get to them because of effective conservation measures. These are very different situations. At present, they're all buried under least concern, and protected area managers are actually to be penalized for the good work they're doing by someone coming along and saying, oh, too many of your species are least concerned, I don't know if we should be funding you. So we really need to have some way of indicating things that are least concerned because of ongoing protection rather than because of lack of potential threats. And just streamlining these, every data entry module can use some streamlining, and this is no exception. So we have some sincere acknowledgments here. Countless curators and staff of Herbaria have helped us in recording specimen data. We've had access to places on weekends where you normally can't get in. There's just I can't count the number of places that Greg Hilton Taylor is the head of the species of the Red List unit, and he's been tirelessly patient with us in getting this work done. George Schoss, who's now retired from the Africa and Madagascar Department, was with us he trained all of us who are doing this work now, and was with us for the first 3 workshops in Kenya and Tanzania, and really got things moving. And Bergen right here has given us changing versions of Esri. I'm completely lost when I get to ArcMap, and from ArcView to ArcMap. Couldn't have made it without Bergen helping me along here. And then she produced the maps for a whole bunch of workshops, and we're very grateful for that. Thank you, Bergen. Funders and facilitators. Well, the Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund grant from 2005 to 2008 got this whole thing started, including establishing the Red List Authority. The MacArthur Foundation, as I said, funded 4 workshops for the Lake Victoria Basin. The Mohammed bin Zayed Species Conservation Fund, which usually only funds single species, 1 or 2 species conservation. We managed to convince them that it would be a good idea to help us do a lot of assessments and find out what more things were. And I think there are 7 or 8 workshops that they funded. It's a tremendous contribution. The Frank Lydia Foundation indirectly has funded BGCI for workshops and other activities, and is partly Frank Lydia funds. They got through BGCI. They got all of those assessments published. National Museums of Kenya is where the East African Herbarium is located, and they've been incredibly cooperative. Q, likewise, we couldn't operate without the specimen and resources at Q. And I put us on there too because this is really a talk by the EAP RLA, not by the Missouri Botanical Garden. And when this is distributed elsewhere, we belong there along with everyone else. So that's what I have to say about the subject for now. And timing worked out pretty well. And Heidi and I will both be glad to answer questions or listen to observations that you may have.